The smoke never clears in Old Yharnam. Even now, years after that terrible night, wisps of ash drift through the abandoned streets like ghosts refusing to rest. Stand at the edge of the great bridge that once connected this district to Cathedral Ward, and you can still smell it. Char and sulphur mixing with something worse, something that makes your hunter's instincts scream warnings your conscious mind can't quite grasp. The flames that consumed this place weren't ordinary fire. They couldn't be. Ordinary fire dies when its fuel is spent. But down in the depths of what was once Yharnam's beating heart, the crucified beasts still burn, their bodies wreathed in flames that have refused to die for longer than anyone cares to remember. Welcome, fellow seekers of forgotten truths, to Keen 7 Lore. Tonight we descend into one of Bloodborne's darkest chapters, not just the story of how Old Yharnam burned, but the untold stories of those who lit the match, those who watched their world turn to cinder, and those who still wander its ruins, trapped between beast and human, between death and something far worse. This isn't just a tale of fire and tragedy. It's a story of choices made when there were no good options left, of hunters who became monsters to fight monsters, and of a church that abandoned its flock when the wolves came calling. The official records, what few remain in the hunter's dream, and the workshops scattered throughout Yharnam, tell a simple story. Old Yharnam fell to the scourge of beasts, the powder kegs, those mad hunters obsessed with explosives and overwhelming firepower, burned it to prevent the plague from spreading. End of story. Move along, good hunter. But walk those charred streets yourself. Read between the lines of the scattered notes. Listen to the ravings of the few who remember, and a different picture emerges. A picture painted in ash and blood, where the heroes might have been villains, where the monsters might have been victims, and where the cure became worse than the disease. To understand that final night, we need to understand what Old Yharnam was before the flames. Picture a district built into the valley below what would become Cathedral Ward. Stone buildings clustered together like prayers seeking heaven, connected by winding staircases and precarious bridges that spider-webbed across the chasm. This was where Yharnam's common folk lived, worked, and died long before the healing church made blood ministration the city's new religion. Craftsmen and labourers, merchants and servants, people whose names history would never remember, but whose screams would echo through eternity. When the Ashen blood came, it struck here first and hardest. The baffling sickness, as the church physicians called it, with their typical clinical detachment, spread through Old Yharnam like wildfire, an ironic comparison given what was to come. The symptoms mimicked poisoning, weakness, fever, a grey pallor that gave the disease its name. The afflicted coughed up ash-coloured phlegm that stained their clothes and sheets, marking them as surely as any brand. In desperation, they turned to the only institution that promised salvation, the healing church and its miraculous blood ministration. We're approaching the heart of Old Yharnam's tragedy now, and if you're finding value in uncovering these buried truths with me, I'd genuinely appreciate if you'd hit that like button. Your support through YouTube's algorithm helps these deep dives into gaming's darkest lore reach fellow hunters seeking answers in the nightmare. Every like is a torch lit against the darkness of forgotten history. The church's response to Ashen blood seemed like divine providence at first. Blood ministration, that miracle cure that had already made Yharnam the jewel of the region, worked wonders against the sickness. 1 transfusion and the grey pallor faded. 2, and the afflicted could walk again. 3, and they proclaimed themselves cured, singing the church's praises from every street corner. The cathedral ward opened special treatment facilities. Ministers walked the streets of Old Yharnam, offering salvation, one syringe at a time. The people welcomed them as saviours. But here's where the carefully maintained church records grow suspiciously vague. The community of lore hunters has pieced together fragments suggesting something far more sinister. The timing is too convenient, the progression too neat. Ashen blood appears suddenly, with no clear origin point. The church just happens to have the perfect cure. The populace becomes dependent on blood ministration en masse. Then, on a night when the red moon hung low, that specific celestial configuration that every hunter learns to fear, everything went wrong at once. Evidence suggests, though the church would never confirm, that ashen blood wasn't defeated by blood ministration. It was transformed by it. The disease didn't disappear, it evolved, twisted by the old blood, into something far worse. The beast Scourge, that nightmare plague that would define Yharnam's fate, might have been born not from random mutation, but from the intersection of disease, treatment, and cosmic timing that the church either couldn't predict, or, more disturbingly, didn't care to prevent. The beast transformations in Old Yharnam happened almost simultaneously. Confirmed canon tells us that on that moonlit night, citizens who had received extensive blood treatment began to change. Not the slow, gradual transformation that hunters experience over years of blood use, but rapid, violent metamorphosis. Bones cracking and reforming, skin splitting to reveal fur and scale, human screams becoming bestial howls, all within hours. Entire families transformed together, their blood-bonded biology synchronizing their descent into beasthood. This is where the powder kegs enter our story. If a weapon ain't got kick, it just ain't worth it, went their motto, and they lived it with an explosive enthusiasm. These weren't your typical hunters, with their elegant trick weapons and precise combat techniques. The powder kegs believed in overwhelming firepower, in solving problems with bombs and bullets rather than blades. They modified their weapons with no regard for tradition or elegance. Only devastation mattered. When reports of mass transformation reached the hunter's workshop, it was the powder kegs who volunteered to respond. Or perhaps, as some sources suggest, they were chosen precisely because everyone knew what their response would be. The leader of this intervention was a hunter, whose name the official records mysteriously omit, but whom survivors would later know as Djura, accompanied by 3 companions, whose identities remain lost to history. He led the powder kegs into Old Yharnam as the beast plague reached critical mass. What they found there defied every protocol, every precedent. This wasn't a hunt anymore, it was a war, and they were catastrophically outnumbered. The church's response to the crisis reveals much about their true priorities. As the powder kegs fought desperately in the streets below, the church sealed the great bridge connecting Old Yharnam to Cathedral Ward. Not to contain the beasts, the winged variants could fly after all, but to prevent the human population from fleeing to the upper city. The message was clear. Old Yharnam was being written off, its people condemned whether they'd transformed or not. If you're finding these revelations as disturbing as they are fascinating, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts who refuse to let gaming's darkest stories remain buried. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible, allowing us to piece together narratives the games themselves only hint at. The decision to burn Old Yharnam wasn't made in the heat of battle. It was calculated, prepared for. The powder kegs had brought more than their usual arsenal. They'd brought oil, specialized incendiary compounds, and most tellingly, large quantities of bone marrow ash, that mysterious substance that makes quicksilver bullets explode on impact. Someone had anticipated this outcome. Someone had prepared for the possibility that an entire district might need to be eliminated. The only question was whether that someone was a prophet or an architect of the disaster. The community theorizes, based on environmental evidence and item placement, that the powder kegs initially tried to establish defensive positions. Scorch marks on certain buildings suggest controlled burns meant to create fire breaks, to contain the transformation to specific blocks, but the scale of the outbreak made such measures futile. When beasts number in the thousands and pour from every doorway, tactical response becomes meaningless. Only total devastation would suffice. On that night of flames, Djura and his companions made the choice that would haunt them forever. They abandoned any pretense of saving Old Yharnam and committed to destroying it. The first fires were set at strategic points: the market district where beasts had gathered in massive numbers, the residential blocks where transformed families huddled together in mockery of their former domesticity, the workshops where beast claws now crafted nothing but death. The powder kegs used everything in their arsenal: fire paper to ignite their weapons, rope molotovs thrown by the dozen, cannon fire that brought down entire buildings on the beasts within. But here's what the official records don't tell you, what you only learn from walking those burned streets and reading the char patterns on the walls. The beasts tried to flee. These mindless monsters, these inhuman abominations that had to be destroyed. They ran from the flames like any terrified animal would. They tried to protect their young, newly transformed children who still wore the tattered remnants of their nightclothes. They died screaming, and those screams sounded horrifyingly, heartbreakingly human. The powder kegs pressed on. What choice did they have? The red moon hung overhead like a judge pronouncing sentence, and every moment of hesitation meant the plague might spread beyond Old Yharnam's borders. They burned through the night, street by street, building by building. The great bonfire that had once been Old Yharnam's heart became literal, flames reaching so high they could be seen from the church's highest towers. The ministers watched from behind their sealed bridge, offering no aid, no guidance, only silent observation as an entire district died. But not everyone in Old Yharnam had transformed. Confirmed canon tells us there were survivors, humans who had somehow resisted or avoided the mass transformation. These people found themselves trapped between two hells: the beasts that had been their neighbors, and the hunters who made no distinction between infected and innocent. Some hid in cellars that became ovens. Others tried to reach the sealed bridge, pounding on the great doors until the flames took them. Still others wrapped themselves in wet cloth and tried to wait out the inferno, praying to gods who had already abandoned them. The environmental storytelling in Old Yharnam provides heartbreaking details. Small corpses clutching dolls, their size suggesting children who never had a chance to transform or flee. Messages scraped on walls: "Mother, where are you?" And "The ministers lied to us." Personal effects scattered in patterns, suggesting families trying to barricade themselves in, not from beasts but from the hunters who had come to save them. Every pile of ash tells a story, and none of them have happy endings. These survivors, those few who somehow endured the burning, would become something unique in Yharnam's cursed history. They didn't die, but they didn't remain fully human either. Transformed by trauma, poisoned by ash and blood, they became what hunters would later classify as beast patients, creatures caught between human and beast, retaining enough intelligence to remember their former lives, but twisted enough that no one would ever call them human again. The beast patients of Old Yharnam display behaviors that disturb precisely because they're so recognizably human. They cover their faces with cloth, hiding transformations they're somehow ashamed of. They work together, coordinating ambushes with tactical intelligence no mere beast should possess. They avoid certain areas, as if respecting territorial boundaries established before their transformation. Most tellingly, they fear fire with an intensity that goes beyond animal instinct. It's the specialized terror of those who remember burning. The developers have confirmed through environmental design that these creatures retain memories of the burning night. They've positioned them in defensive formations, placed them near what were once their homes, had them clutch items that might have been treasured possessions. One particularly heartbreaking detail. In certain buildings, beast patients can be found arranged around tables, as if still trying to maintain the ritual of family dinners in their transformed state. But the most disturbing revelation about Old Yharnam's survivors comes from the blood-starved beast that lurks in the Church of the Good Chalice at the district's heart. This creature, draped in tattered robes that suggest religious authority, was almost certainly a church minister who remained in Old Yharnam during the burning. The extensive blood ministration that clergy received to protect them from infection instead cursed them with a unique transformation. The blood-starved beast's poisonous attacks, its desiccated appearance, its location in the church, all evidence points to someone who tried to minister to the dying, even as they themselves succumbed to the Scourge. This adds another layer to the church's betrayal. They didn't just abandon Old Yharnam, they abandoned their own people there. Ministers who had been sent to provide blood healing, who had been told they were protected by their faith and their blood, discovered too late that the church's promises were worth less than the ash now coating the streets. The blood-starved beast's desperate hunger might be more than bestial instinct. It might be the transformed remnant of a holy person who died believing salvation would come. The immediate aftermath of the burning reveals the true scope of the horror, through what didn't happen as much as what did. There was no relief effort, no search for survivors, no attempt to reclaim or rebuild. The church simply sealed Old Yharnam off and pretended it had never existed. Maps were redrawn. Records were destroyed or classified. The survivors, human or otherwise, were left to fend for themselves in a tomb of ash and char. Djura's transformation from hunter to protector might be the only redemptive element in this entire tragedy. Something broke in him that night. Not his mind, but perhaps his faith in the hunt itself. The official records end with the successful containment of the Old Yharnam outbreak. But Djura's story was just beginning. He looked at what they'd done, at the city of ash they'd created, at the survivors crawling through the ruins, and he made a choice that no other hunter had made before or since. He chose to stop hunting. The game presents Djura as an adversary, a madman with a Gatling gun who attacks hunters on sight. But understand his position. He stands guard over the remnants of his greatest failure and greatest sin. Every beast in Old Yharnam was once a person he was supposed to save. Every burning corpse represents a choice he made. When he tells the player character that the beasts are people, he's not speaking from madness, but from terrible, intimate knowledge. He was there when they transformed. He was there when they burned. He heard their screams and recognized voices of people he might have known. Djura's 3 companions, those unnamed powder kegs who fought beside him, each responded to the trauma differently. One guards the entrance to Old Yharnam, warning hunters away, though whether to protect the beasts or the hunters remains unclear. Another patrols the burning streets, attacking anyone who might disturb the uneasy peace of the dead. The third's fate remains unknown, though some theorize they became one of the beasts they once hunted, completing a circle of tragic irony that Yharnam seems to specialize in. The philosophical implications of Djura's choice resonate throughout Bloodborne's narrative. Here is a hunter who achieved the dream's goal. He successfully hunted beasts, contained an outbreak, saved Yharnam from destruction. Yet he rejected everything about that victory. His vigil over Old Yharnam becomes a living criticism of the hunt itself. Every hunter who faces him must confront the question, are we heroes or executioners? When he offers to spare those who agree not to harm the beasts, he's offering more than a truce. He's offering a different perspective on the entire cycle of hunt and horror. The powder keg badge that Djura gives to those who earn his respect carries weight beyond its mechanical benefits. It's a farewell gift, he says. But farewell to what? To the hunter? To the dream? Or to the last shred of faith that the hunt serves any purpose beyond perpetuating itself? The badge that once symbolized explosive solutions to impossible problems becomes a reminder that some problems can't be solved, only survived or accepted. The eternal flames that still burn in Old Yharnam deserve special consideration. These aren't natural fires. Confirmed canon establishes that they've burned far longer than any fuel source could maintain. The crucified beasts wreathed in flame, the ever-burning buildings, the perpetual smoke. Something supernatural maintains these flames. Some theorize it's the Church's final curse, ensuring Old Yharnam remains a warning. Others suggest it's the manifestation of the trauma itself, that the horror of that night literally burned itself into reality. The magical components found throughout Old Yharnam support the supernatural theory. Oil urns that never empty, bone marrow ash that regenerates, fire paper that ignites without degradation. The district has become a self-sustaining crematorium. The implication is deeply disturbing. Old Yharnam isn't just abandoned. It's actively maintained in its state of perpetual burning. Someone or something wants it to keep burning forever, a monument to either shame or threat. This brings us to the broader implications for Yharnam as a whole. Old Yharnam wasn't the first district to fall to the beast plague, and it wouldn't be the last. The city's history reads like a series of amputations, cutting away infected districts rather than addressing the underlying disease. Lauren fell to beasts in ancient times. Old Yharnam burned in recent memory. Central Yharnam teeters on the edge of the same fate. The pattern repeats because the cause, blood ministration, communion with the old ones, the fundamental corruption at the Church's heart, remains unchanged. The Church learned all the wrong lessons from Old Yharnam. Instead of questioning blood ministration, they refined it. Instead of seeking alternatives to burning, they simply got better at it. Fire paper became standard hunter equipment. Every workshop stocks oil and Molotovs. The solution to the beast plague became institutionalized violence, creating hunters who were just beasts of a different sort. The tragedy of Old Yharnam didn't end that night. It became the template for Yharnam's future. The player character's journey through Old Yharnam becomes a walk through this institutionalized trauma. Every mechanic reinforces the cycle. Beasts drop blood vials that make you stronger, but inch you closer to beasthood. Fire damage is extraordinarily effective, teaching you to burn first and question later. And Djura's entreaties to spare the beasts are presented as optional at best. The game systems themselves push you toward repeating history, toward becoming another powder keg, lighting another match. Yet the game also provides alternatives, hidden paths that honor Djura's perspective. You can reach him without killing a single beast in Old Yharnam. You can accept his worldview and receive his blessing. You can choose to see the beasts as he does, not as monsters to be eliminated, but as victims to be mourned or even protected. These choices don't change Old Yharnam's fate, but they change your relationship to it, transforming you from conqueror to witness. The untold stories of Old Yharnam's burning ultimately converge on a single terrible truth. Everyone involved believed they were doing the right thing. The church believed they were providing healing. The citizens believed they were receiving salvation. The powder kegs believed they were containing disaster. Even the beasts, in whatever consciousness remained to them, might have believed they were simply trying to survive. Good intentions paved the road to Old Yharnam, and that road ended in ash. Consider the cruel poetry of the name itself, Old Yharnam. It's old now, ancient history, a cautionary tale that no one heeded. But once it was just Yharnam, the living heart of a thriving city, full of people who laughed and loved and never imagined they'd become either monsters or memories. The old was added after the burning, a linguistic burial that let the city move on without acknowledging what it had lost and what it had done. The survivors who still wander those streets, the beast patients, the blood-starved beast, perhaps others too twisted to classify, exist in a perpetual present tense of that horrible night. For them, the burning never ended. They're trapped in the moment of transformation and destruction, unable to fully die, but unable to truly live. Their existence is perhaps the cruelest joke in a city built on cruel jokes, a living reminder that some sins can't be forgiven because they never actually end. This perspective reframes the entire hunt. Every beast in Yharnam might be an Old Yharnam survivor in the making. Every district a potential pyre, every hunter a future Djura wrestling with what they've done. The cycle doesn't repeat because Yharnam forgets its history. It repeats because Yharnam can't imagine any other response. When your only tool is fire, everything starts to look flammable. The environmental storytelling reaches its peak in the small details that only become visible when you stop hunting and start observing. Charred children's toys in patterns suggesting they were arranged post-burning, as if someone tried to maintain a shrine. Claw marks on doors that could be beasts trying to get in or humans trying to get out. Messages in the hunter's notebook that change meaning depending on whether you read them as warnings or laments. Old Yharnam speaks, but only to those who stop long enough to listen. The true horror isn't that Old Yharnam burned. It's that its burning was inevitable from the moment the first blood ministration was performed there. The church created the conditions for disaster, provided the spark, then stepped back to watch it burn. The powder kegs were just the mechanism, not the cause. The beasts were just the excuse, not the reason. The real culprit was the system itself, a city so dependent on blood that it would rather burn districts than question its addiction. Modern Yharnam, what players explore in the game's present, is built literally on Old Yharnam's ashes. The prosperity of the upper districts exists because the lower district burned. The church's authority stems partly from being the only institution that survived the disaster they helped create. The hunt continues because without it, Yharnam would have to confront what it did to Old Yharnam and what it's doing to itself. This cyclical nature appears throughout Bloodborne's lore, but nowhere more starkly than in Old Yharnam. The red moon that hung low that night, it returns regularly, bringing new transformations. The beast plague that necessitated the burning, it spreads through central Yharnam during the game. The choice between burning and accepting. Every hunter faces it eventually. Djura isn't guarding Old Yharnam. He's holding up a mirror to every hunter who passes through, asking them to see themselves in the ash. The powder kegs disbanded after Old Yharnam, their philosophy of overwhelming firepower proven both effective and horrific. But their weapons remain, scattered throughout Yharnam like seeds of future destruction. Every hunter who picks up a powder keg weapon inherits a piece of that night, becomes capable of repeating it. The tools of massacre become heirlooms, passed down until their original sin is forgotten, but their destructive potential remains. In the end, Old Yharnam's final night wasn't really final at all. It was a rehearsal for Yharnam's eventual fate, a preview of how the city would ultimately handle its beast problem, with fire and abandonment rather than understanding or cure. The burning continues literally in those eternal flames, spiritually in the hunt's philosophy, and mechanically in every player's journey through the game. The untold stories of the burning aren't untold because they're unknown. They're untold because telling them would require Yharnam to admit its complicity in its own destruction. Every burned building is a confession. Every beast patient is an accusation. Every eternal flame is a question. How many times will Yharnam burn its own before it admits the fire comes from within? Djura understands this, which is why he can't leave. His vigil isn't penance. One man's guilt couldn't balance such scales. It's witness. He stays to ensure someone remembers Old Yharnam as it was, not as the church's records claim. He fights hunters not from madness, but from clarity, understanding that every beast killed validates the burning, perpetuates the cycle, makes the next Old Yharnam inevitable. When players finally reach Djura, if they reach him without becoming another powder keg burning their way through, he offers them a profound gift: perspective. The things you hunt, they're not beasts. They're people. This isn't delusion. It's perhaps the sanest observation in all of Yharnam. The beasts were people. The hunters are becoming beasts. The church that claims to heal spreads the very plague it promises to cure. Everyone is transforming, just at different rates and in different directions. The blood-starved beast in the abandoned church might be Old Yharnam's most tragic figure. A church minister who stayed when others fled, who tried to provide comfort even as the flames rose, who transformed not from cowardice, but from compassion. Its poisonous blood, its desperate hunger, its position in the hint, church, all suggest someone who gave everything to their faith and received only abandonment and transformation in return. When hunters fight it, they're not just killing a beast, they're eliminating the last witness to the church's original sin in Old Yharnam. This reading transforms the boss fight from triumph to tragedy. The blood echoes gained from defeating the blood-starved beast aren't rewards. They're blood money, payment for silencing testimony the church would rather forget. The key items found in the church, particularly the Pthumerian chalice, suggest deeper connections between Old Yharnam's fate and the ancient civilizations that fell to similar plagues. History doesn't repeat in Yharnam. It rhymes in screams and burns in cycles. As we near the end of this dark journey through Old Yharnam's ashes, it's worth considering what lessons the game wants us to take from this tragedy. Bloodborne doesn't offer easy morality or clear heroes. The powder kegs who burned Old Yharnam might have saved the rest of the city. The church's abandonment might have been pragmatic necessity. Even the beast plague itself serves the Old One's incomprehensible purposes, making judgment from a human perspective almost meaningless. But Djura's transformation from hunter to guardian suggests another path, one that rejects both the hunt's violence and the church's authority. He doesn't offer solutions. Old Yharnam remains a burning ruin under his watch. But he offers something perhaps more valuable: the acknowledgement that the current system is broken, that hunting beasts doesn't solve the problem of people becoming beasts, that fire doesn't purify, it just destroys. The player's choice whether to fight or befriend Djura becomes a philosophical statement about how we engage with gaming narratives about necessary evil and justified violence. Do we accept the game's framing that beasts must be hunted, or do we question why beasts exist at all? Do we perpetuate cycles of violence because that's what the mechanics encourage? Or do we seek alternatives even when the game makes them harder to achieve? Old Yharnam stands as gaming's great monument to unintended consequences and institutional failure. Every aspect of its tragedy was predictable, some might say designed. The Church introduced blood ministration, knowing its risks. They distributed it widely during the Ashen blood outbreak, despite understanding its transformative potential. They had protocols for district burning before Old Yharnam needed burning. The disaster wasn't a surprise. It was a business model. This cynical reading gained support from the game's broader narrative about the Church's relationship with the old blood. They knew it came from the old ones. They knew it caused mutations. They knew the moon's cycles affected transformations. Yet they built an entire city's economy and identity around blood ministration. Old Yharnam's burning wasn't a failure of the system. It was the system working exactly as designed, culling the infected while maintaining the Church's authority. The eternal flames become even more sinister in this context. They're not just supernatural punishment or lingering trauma, they're advertisement. Every hunter who passes through Old Yharnam sees what happens to districts that fall to the beast plague. The message is clear. Submit to the Church's authority or burn. Accept the hunt's necessity or become its target. There are no alternatives in Yharnam, only delays before the inevitable burning. Yet players consistently find beauty in Old Yharnam's tragedy. The way light filters through the smoke, the mournful sound of wind through burned buildings, the strange peace that comes from accepting Djura's perspective and seeing the beasts as fellow victims rather than enemies. There's something profound about choosing not to fight in a game built around combat, about recognizing humanity in the inhuman. This brings us to the ultimate question Old Yharnam poses. What do we do when there are no good choices? The powder kegs faced an impossible situation. Let the plague spread or burn the infected district. The Church faced an impossible situation. Admit their cure caused the disease or maintain their authority through denial. Djura faces an impossible situation. Protect beasts who kill hunters or allow hunters to kill beasts who were once people. There's no right answer, only different wrong ones with varying degrees of horror. The game's genius lies in making players complicit in this impossibility. You can't save Old Yharnam. You can't cure the beast patients. You can't undo the burning. You can only choose how to relate to the tragedy. As hunter, perpetuating the cycle. As witness acknowledging the horror, or as guardian protecting what remains. Each choice carries weight, because each choice contributes to Yharnam's future, determining whether the next district burns or whether someone, anyone, finally says, enough. As our exploration of Old Yharnam's final night draws to a close, we're left with images that burn as eternally as those cursed flames. The powder keg standing over a burning playground, wondering if the small figures fleeing the flames were beasts or children. The church minister transforming into the blood-starved beast, their faith literally consuming them from within. The survivors crawling through ash, becoming something neither human nor beast, but eternally suspended between. Djura sitting in his tower, watching over a kingdom of ash, and asking every hunter who passes, is this what victory looks like? Old Yharnam's tragedy isn't that it burned. It's that its burning taught Yharnam nothing. The city above continues its blood ministrations. The hunt continues its violence. The church continues its lies. The only thing that changed was the map, redrawn to exclude an inconvenient truth. Old Yharnam became a wound. Yharnam refuses to heal, a memory it refuses to process, a warning it refuses to heed. But you, fellow seeker of forgotten truths, you now know what really happened on that final night. You know about the Ashen blood that was never just a disease. You know about the church that abandoned its flock. You know about the powder kegs who burned what they couldn't save. You know about the survivors who became something worse than dead. Most importantly, you know about Djura, the hunter who looked at what he'd done and chose to stop hunting, to start protecting, to bear witness to a sin that Yharnam desperately wants to forget. This knowledge carries responsibility. When you next walk through Old Yharnam, whether in-game or in memory, you'll see more than just another level to clear. You'll see the stories buried in ash, the humanity trapped in beasthood, the system's failure crystallized in eternal flame. You'll understand that every beast was once a person with a name, a family, a life that mattered until the night it all burned away. Thank you for joining me in excavating these painful truths from Old Yharnam's ashes. If this deep dive into one of gaming's darkest tragedies has resonated with you, if you found value in understanding the stories behind the screams, please consider subscribing to Keen 7 Lore. Your support helps keep these investigations into gaming's most profound narratives alive. Together, we're building a community that refuses to let gaming's most important stories remain untold, that insists on looking deeper even when what we find disturbs us. Remember, the hunt makes monsters of us all, but understanding why might be the first step toward breaking the cycle. Until next time, fellow lore seekers, may you find your worth in the waking world, and may your insights burn brighter than Old Yharnam's eternal flames. This has been Keen 7 Lore, where no story is too dark to tell, no truth too buried to unearth, and no tragedy too painful to understand. The smoke may never clear in Old Yharnam, but perhaps, through understanding its story, we can prevent the next fire from being lit.